another panel on a monument campaign. And we have our keynote speaker today, Councilmember Rebecca Kaplan. But now we have some members of our fabulous BVP team you've seen over the past 2 days. Fun fact, you have seen almost every single member of the BVP team this weekend hosting panels. We finally have enough staff to be able to do that. The person you didn't get to see is our new Story Bank organizer, Aaron Rook. He has been on the table, though, and talking to all of you there, so I hope you have met him. Please sign up for the Story Bank. We need your voices, and we need you to tell your story. But now I want to introduce our fabulous panel of BVP staff who are here, not everybody, but some of them. Brian Harris, who is our voter education organizer. We have Matilda Guerrero, who everybody knows and loves because of her lipstick. She is our digital manager. We have Amber Falco, who just ran that wonderful session on education and voucher schemes. And then, of course, Will Pregman, our communications director. Fun fact, everybody, it is Will's 5-year anniversary. So happy anniversary of being at BVP. You made it, Will. Congratulations. I don't know how you did it. All right, friends, let's get started. I want to get right in. So, Brian, I'm going to start with you. This is your first legislative session with us ever, also. Based on our check-ins and conversations this weekend at the summit and all the things you've heard about session, as we've been planning the past 2-3 months, what are you most excited about for these next 5 months going into session when I move up to Carson City?
Well, thank you, Annette, for having me. I really appreciate it again. Hello, everybody. I'm really excited about learning more about what it means to be a lobbyist. I've never been to Carson City. I've never been a part of a legislative session, so this is all fairly new to me, but I'm really just excited to learn more and be a part of the great legislative process that happens here in Nevada, and hold our legislators accountable, and make sure we continue to do the good work that we do here in Nevada.
So, Brian, there are many new people on the summit this weekend who, just like you, have never done legislative session, have never been to a legislative session, and that's why we wanted to make it so accessible this weekend for people to learn and grow, because we have all different levels of activists here this weekend. So, what are some things you're excited to do this year at the legislative session? Like, do you want to testify? Are you looking forward to going? Like, what's like exciting for you?
I'm actually looking forward to going and building relationships with legislators and actually getting to know them for who they are and really understanding the way that they think and how they feel about certain issues, and also to convey to them how I feel about certain issues, and make my voice heard, because I feel as if now that I've been a part of this work, I've come to express myself more and be better at telling how I feel about certain issues. So that's really what I'm looking forward to this session, just like really getting to know the legislators and seeing how they feel.
All right, Will, I want to bring you in. Just for those at home, if you have any questions for any of our BVP team, now's the time to ask. Put them in the Q&A. We're open books, so any questions are on the table, minus the color of Matilda's lipstick or who she's dating because she has a husband. So, Will, talk to me about you being an NV-Ledge. That's the hashtag, by the way, for everybody who tweets about the legislature, hashtag NVLEG, like leg, but ledge. So you're an NV-Ledge veteran. You have been up there with me many sessions. You actually worked there as a legislative intern. In what ways do you expect this session to be the same? What ways do you expect it to be different than the other sessions you participated in? And what are your expectations, and what should people at home be expecting going into the legislative session?
Yes, thank you, Annette, and thank you for also mentioning too that I've been with BVP team now for 5 years, just as of this month. So I started in January 2018, so this will now be my 3rd full session with the team. But if you count special sessions and such, I think we'll probably be about 6 or 7 at this point. But I've been doing work with the legislature since the 2015 session, back when I was an intern, and then I worked at my previous job during the 2017 session, and then the 2019, 2021, and now 2023 sessions with BVP. So as for what is going to be different, obviously we have a new governor and a bit of a divided government in that we have Republican Joe Lombardo and Republican Stavros Anthony, Lieutenant Governor, presiding over the Democratic majorities and supermajority in the case of the Assembly in the legislature. So I think it's going to lead to a lot of interesting dynamics. The last few sessions, we've had a trifecta of Democratic control. So there was this expectation that a lot of things were, if something was the priority of the governor or something was priority of the leadership of the legislature, that it was pretty much moving forward, and that was kind of a reliable assumption. Now that's not really the case, because you have a governor who's going to lay out tomorrow in his State of the State speech a whole bunch of priorities that I'm sure some of which the legislature will be willing to work with him on, some things maybe not so much, like vouchers. And that's going to create a lot of tension, especially towards the end of the session when there can be hot button negotiations to figure out the budget at the end. And then I think what will be likely the same is you're going to see a continuous ramp of activity towards the end of the final months, where there is going to be likely a sort of game of chickens standoff of who's going to blink first when it comes to certain priorities. We've seen that in other sessions, but it'll look a little bit different this time around just because of the dynamic. I can say that probably what I anticipate this will be most analogous to, if I was going to make a prediction, would be the 2017 legislative session, where there were Democratic majorities in the House, but you still had Republican Governor Brian Sandoval. And I remember there were points during that session, especially during big deadline weeks and days, where there would be a lot of, shots across the bow of like, I'm going to pass this bill, well, I'm going to veto this bill, and so on and so forth. So we might see something similar to that, but my hope is that our legislators who are friendly to progressive issues hold the line on certain things like vouchers, and don't allow a Republican governor who frankly won the razor-thin majority, not much of a mandate, to dictate the terms of negotiation going into June.
Well, you and I have talked about this a lot. I have very strong feelings on this, but I feel like you can channel my feelings on this question. Talk to us about people having wish lists going into this session on the progressive side, or thinking they're going to get everything done under the sun like they did last two legislative sessions, or hell, even, just getting bills moved to the governor's desk potentially, being that we're going to have to do some horse trading at the end of session. Like, talk to us about what reality is and what an actual win looks like, which in my opinion looks like us getting out of session without rolling things back and doing damage to the victories of the past few sessions.
Certainly, and I would even say that really the whole wish list approach probably wasn't even reality, even under the previous administration either, for various reasons. But I think especially now that you have Joe Lombardo as governor, that there's going to be, there's an intense legislative process where every bill has to go through that we covered in previous sessions during today, that when it reaches the governor's desk, the governor has the ability to veto it. And unfortunately, we're one seat shy in the Senate side of getting a 2/3, which would give us essentially a veto-proof majority, or the ability to override a governor's veto, which would most likely manifest itself as the governor just letting things become law if you didn't agree with it, because he would know that that vote was possible. I would say that people need to think a little bit strategically, because the things that do make it to the governor's desk that he gets to then take action on, whether he signs it or vetoes it, is also part of his own communication strategy. He's got his own comms people, he's got his own apparatus for communicating with the media, and he's got his bully pulpit as the governor, where he's able to dictate the terms of certain things. He does have that power. Now, it's our job, of course, to neutralize that power as much as possible, but he nevertheless does have it. And what that means is when we send things to his desk that we think or that we know he's going to veto, we want to do so knowing that that veto is going to be politically costly for him in some way. For example, an issue that's extremely popular, like, say, reining in the cost of housing or the cost of prescription drugs, that most people, regardless of party, are concerned about, forcing him to veto a bill like that is going to be extremely costly for him. Even if we don't get the win in terms of, oh, we passed this bill, the fact of the matter is the governor is going to have to go back to the constituents and to Nevadans and be like, oh, yeah, I vetoed the thing that would have made your insulin cheaper. And that's going to look like an egg on his face, since we're talking about the high price of eggs. And Matilda will have more to say on that, I'm sure. But another fact of the matter is if we send something to his desk that maybe for us who are part of the progressive movement, something that's popular amongst ourselves, but doesn't necessarily enjoy broad public support, or maybe there's the waters have been muddied per se, then you could see a very different situation where he comes out looking like the hero for saying like, I put a stop to those radical leftist socialists or whatever because I vetoed the bill to do whatever. And of course, again, it's all about give and take and accountability, but that's something that, from a legislative point of view, we want to be strategic about what we're sending to his desk, because what he vetoes or signs is going to impact our strategy overall.
Thanks, Will. All right, Amber, I want to come to you. There's a question in the chat or in the Q&A from someone who says, what's BBP's main priorities this session? And what can people expect from your org in the legislature, and what can partner organizations expect as we work together? And I think that's important, especially in the context of today and the mass shooting that happened today. A lot of your work is our gun violence prevention work, and so we have a lot of internal priorities of our own that I want you to talk about first, and then we can talk about the stuff that we will be helping our partners with.
Sure. Thank you so much, Annette. Yeah, that's a wonderful segue, and especially with what we saw this morning. I'll make it quick. So we have a couple things moving as far as gun violence prevention right now. I'm not going to go into super detail, but we would like to address things like hate crimes and the ability to carry firearms after that, domestic violence, the ability to carry firearms after that, because why? And various other, priorities that are in the gun violence realm. I think what you're going to see is obviously a big internal push for us to do those, but we will also have, I'm sure, a ton of priorities that we're supporting for our partners.
Yeah, and Amber, I actually do want you to get into Assemblywoman Howdige's bill a little bit more and the details of that, because I think they are important in the context of what we did last legislative session with the Ghost Guns bill, and also the election protection work that we're still doing. That is where our election protection work and our gun violence prevention work meet. And so talk a little bit more about that bill, because that's going to be our omnibus bill this session.
Absolutely. So what we saw in the last election, and what we've seen over, I think, the last few years, is an increase in political violence, an increase in extremism groups. What that is translated to is, unfortunately, more and more people cropping up at vote centers and polling locations with firearms. And while most of us on this wonderful summit today know that that can be incredibly intimidating, I think a lot of folks don't realize that. So we are looking at ways to address having them there at all, because let's be honest, if you go in to vote, you shouldn't be intimidated. You shouldn't be dealing with someone with an AR-15 or a Glock or whatever while you're trying to cast your vote. In addition to that, I think it's important that we do a language fix to our previous Ghost Gun bill, because that is an incredible piece of legislation that reins in these essentially, untraceable firearms, right? So we don't want Nevada to be a playground or a contributor to that. So I think changing that language is going to be incredibly important as well. And all of that you'll see in the omnibus bill.
Yeah, and we'll come back in a second with Will and you to talk more about some of the partner legislation that we want to focus on this year, and some of the other things we'll be watching at the end of session to make sure that we're not rolling things back. Matilda, I want to bring you in. This is going to be your first legislative session with BBP, but not your first legislative session. What are you most looking forward to this session? Getting, being able to go up there, getting ready to learn. What are you looking forward to?
Well, one of the main things I'm always looking forward to when we go to Carson City is just to be in the people's house. I love going to those, to be in the building and hear directly from to hear directly from our electeds. And honestly, one of my favorite parts is just watching public comment happen and just watching them from YouTube and from the live stream is so much different than actually watching them in person. One of my favorite parts about the legislature in general is just hearing public comment, to listen to people's stories and to uplift those stories as much as possible.
Okay, so you're our digital social media guru on the team. Talk to us about some of the things people need to know about session and social media, how social media works during session, the fact that legislators literally check their social media while they're sitting up there during hearings and such, hashtags, all of that good stuff. What do folks need to know?
So if you're anything like me and you want to keep all your hot gossip, the 411, the hottest chisme in one thread, make sure that you're looking up the hashtag NB Wedge, like Annette said, NB like leg. That way you're able to see all the hot things that folks are talking about as folks are live tweeting. As we're live tweeting, we're always using the hashtag NB Wedge. And make sure that you're adding the elected officials, because they really do look and they will reference sometimes the things that they see on Twitter. They are watching to see what folks are talking about, because this is another great way for folks to engage in this process, and another way for folks to share your opinion. I know that oftentimes there is a digital divide, and often there's not that many folks who look on Twitter every single day. My husband doesn't look at his Twitter, but one of the things that he does do is, while he doesn't have an account, he will go on the Twitter website and just look up the hashtag NBLedge to see what's happening. In fact, I know that he's also looking at the summit hashtag, because he's been texting me all the cool things that we've been talking about throughout the day. So if you're going to take anything from all the cool lobbying, from all the Nellis 101s and the legislative lobbying 101s that we did today, always make sure that you're using the hashtag NBWedge, and to tag elected officials, because they will see it and they want to hear from you.
Thank you, Matilda. And what do you think the single most important thing that the folks watching at home, everyday Nevadans, can do to participate in the legislature? We've said it a few times today, but I cannot stress it enough. Real humans need to participate in the legislative session, whether it's calling their legislators, sending a letter, sending an email, showing up to testify, because they get sick of me. I mean, they literally are always mad at me anyways, but they literally get sick of hearing from me. So it's so much better that for you all to come up and have them hear from real people. So what do you think is the single best way or most effective way for people to do that, Matilda?
You know, Annette, we talk about this all the time. We talk about the different ways to engage in the civic engagement process. Yes, there are grassroots organizations and many organizations who are coming out and testifying at these things. They see our faces pretty often, but they want to hear from you. Here at BVP, we're working for you. We're uplifting your stories. Yes, we can uplift your stories, but they want to hear from you. So if there's one thing that you take away from this weekend, other than using the hashtag NBLedge, remember that if you want to see a change in your community, whether it's in any of the issues that we talked about over the weekend, it starts by electing champions who will do you right by those issues. And once those champions are elected in those spaces, it's making sure that they're hearing from you. It's holding them accountable, telling them what you want, telling them the things that you want to see in your communities. So one of the greatest ways to participate is by using the Share Your Opinion page. Melody and MT did a really amazing job earlier on today talking about Nellis. They did an amazing job telling folks how to submit your written public comment. Holly did an amazing job explaining what grassroots lobbying is like. So when folks when organizations are doing these cool grassroots lobby days, come up with them, talk to your legislators, give them a call, send them an email. And just as Senator Doñate had stated earlier, they do look at their social medias, slide in their DMs, send them a question, add them on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever means you want to, and ask them your question. They will hear from you, and they want to hear from you.
Brian, you want to hop in?
Yeah, I'd just like to also add that we also have a great story bank program here with Aaron. So if you would like to also share your story during legislative session and testify, please get in contact with Aaron. I know someone from our team will drop their contact information in the chat, but please get in touch with them. They really would like to hear your story and uplift your story. And, that's another good way to get involved with the legislative session this year.
All right, Brian, we're sticking with you. So what will the Democrats have to do this session to prevent the rollback of our hard-fought progress from the previous sessions under the new administration? And we've talked about this a few times now, right? We're talking about voting rights. We're talking about criminal justice reform and all of the good things we did the past 2 sessions on that. We're talking about abortion. We're talking about LGBTQ plus protections. We're talking about environmental protections, public lands, like all of the stuff we work on and care about. How do we make sure that the new governor and some of the Republicans don't make a deal to roll those things back? Vouchers, all of it.
Well, I feel like the Democrats need to draw a line in the sand and hold it and really stand their ground on the things that really matter to our communities and not allow Republicans and other folks from the other side of the aisle to try to draw up a deal with them and make a deal when, if you give us this, we'll do this for you. Like we want to make sure that we are holding our ground and making sure that, the things that we've put in place here in Nevada are solid and they don't get rolled back for any reason at all, because we're not here to negotiate school vouchers. We're not here to negotiate criminal justice reform. We're not here to negotiate any of those things because those things were put in place for a reason. So we want to make sure that we continue to do the things that we've been doing so far and not roll backwards, because that would be horrible for our communities and horrible for the hard work that we've been putting in here in Nevada.
Amber, I want to come back to you. You recently moved and had to deal firsthand with the absurd housing crisis, which we talked about earlier. What are you hoping legislators do this session to rein in these ridiculous costs and deal with the housing crisis in a real way, regardless of whether we have a Republican governor or not?
Sure. Thank you so much. That's a really good question. I think this is an issue that transcends party affiliation. This is an issue that affects Democrats, it affects Republicans, it affects all of us at this point. So what I'm hoping to see done is anything from tenants' rights to, a rent cap. There's a big long list of things that we could do when it comes to housing. So I think we need to prioritize tenants' rights first and expand from there and look at solutions that are proven to work. I am hopeful that we'll be able to do that. I think we're reaching with housing a point that we reached right around the time we got the ACA and healthcare, with the high costs and how it was just the will to do it outweighed the political unwill to do it. And I think housing is getting to that point as well.
Thanks for that, Amber. All right, Matilda, I want to come back to you. There's a question in the chat that it is directed to you, and I think it's important. Can you tell us a little more about your social media strategies and thought process on going into session? And I think that's really important as we plan for social media going ahead.
When we talk about community engagement and voter education, we need to talk about the equity piece of it all. It's important to recognize that we're not all at the same levels. Every single person on this call and everyone and beyond, we all know things, we all communicate things very differently, so we have to make sure that we're meeting folks where they're at. So it also means language accessibility, to take the language and to make it digestible. So instead of using this big chunk that explains what something is, explaining it in 5 words or less, or explaining it in a way that's easy for folks to remember and understand. For example, in our social media posts, what makes things fun and exciting and engaging is by catching someone's attention. So I know that here at the BVP team, we're going to be putting out some amazing content soon. We're going to be addressing a lot of amazing issues such as climate change, housing and whatnot in fun and innovative ways. So you'll have to keep up with us. Be sure to keep up with us at Battleborn Progress. On Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Twitch. I'm giving you all a sneak peek. and you'll see all the fun and amazing things that we talk about. But when we also talk about social media, I also think it's important that we make it accessible. That we have to make sure that we're being equitable and inclusive to all folks. So whether that means using alt text, using voiceovers, making sure that our captions are actually explaining what the graphic is saying. So regardless of someone's ability to view and read things on it independently, we're able to make sure that we're catering to all folks. And I wanted to give a very special shout out to one of my favorite persons ever, to Dora Michelle Martinez, who I believe is still on. Dora, you are one of my favorite persons on the world, and I'm so glad that I had met you, and I'm looking forward to hopefully to meet you during the session.
Yes, we love Dora. She's amazing. Okay, Brian, I want to come back to you. What do you think are going to be some of the things that are going to be key issues this session, or you hope that will be key issues this session? Things that you'd like to see?
Well, I'd really like to see us trying to expand on the vote by mail system and make it, even more accessible for voters. Like Matilda was saying, language accessibility. I'd really like to see those things get brought up, and also better housing for folks. I really want those to be tackled this session. Like, those things are really important, and I really want those to be like real targeting main focuses this legislative session.
Amber, same question for you. Obviously, you've already talked about housing. We talk a lot about that here with your experience, but what are some of the other issues that, you care about personally that you'd like to see addressed this session?
Absolutely. Yes, definitely housing. We've talked about that. Obviously, the gun violence prevention measures. I think fixing the ghost gun bill is really close to my heart. I know it's close to Annette's heart as well. We really want to make sure that that is a priority and that moves through because it's important. And then I think also stopping no idea of school vouchers. As a parent, that concerns me as well. I know I just did that panel. That's going to be an issue I'm looking for as well. And then lastly, climate. I think we need to do more on climate because I'd like my kids to be able to breathe in 10 or 20 years.
Yeah, as somebody with asthma, I concur. So yes. Matilda, you're getting a lot of love in the chat. I really love it. Matilda's a great speaker, which I agree. Will we see her in Carson City and lobbying for us? And my goal is to have everybody up there. So Matilda, what are you most excited about when it comes to lobbying this session? Because I know you and I have talked a lot about that.
So one of my favorite things about being on this team is that I get to learn a lot of new things. I get to watch our fearless leader Annette do amazing things. I have to censor myself there. Do a lot of amazing things to making sure that we get shit done. I'm gonna say that because I heard Sophie say it last night. One of the cool things I'm really excited to do is going up to Carson City and learning from her. I want to go into that building and watch her see and watch her make change happen right in front of me. I want to see the cool things that we can all do together and learn how to do that, because just like how folks were talking about it like yesterday, there's a new generation. That's me, that's Brian, and that's all the folks who are on this call too, that we're coming there. And we're excited to learn.
Yeah, I'm definitely not the new generation anymore because I'm elderly when it comes to this team. And the young ones I have on my team now, I love the young folks we have here and the folks coming even behind them now who are especially young. They are going to make such incredible change. Yes, you are the Young People Caucus, my friends. And I'm excited to see you learn and grow. So it's been fun to mentor all of them. Brian, you're getting some love in the chat too. I'm excited about that. Brian, what have you learned in your time so far with BVP since it's your first year? And how do you think it's prepared you for session? Are you nervous?
Well, I've learned a lot. I've learned things from like just how the government works, because I wasn't the one to pay attention in economics class and government class in high school. I'm gonna just say that right now. I just wasn't. But being here at BVP, they really taught me like the ins and outs and what like a lot of terminology means, and it's prepared me for session because now I can go into session and not be like, I wouldn't say oblivious, but like I wouldn't be clueless of what's going on. Like they really helped me out with, all of the knowledge that they really had. They really just poured into me and really done a lot of mentoring with me. Like I sit side by side with Annette a lot of times. Even Matilda, I sit by with Matilda. She's taught me how to read a bill, and it's been really great. But I cannot lie, I definitely am still nervous about it. But I feel that I'm gonna just also go with something that has also told me, when you're nervous, that means you care. And I was nervous yesterday for my panel. I was even nervous for this one, and these are my fellow coworkers. But I definitely do still get nervous about things, and I think that also helps me digest the information that I'm learning and taking in, because even though I'm nervous, I still push through and overcome, and like Matilda said again, get shit done, because that's what we gotta do.
All right, well, I think that is a great way to end this panel. We are going to go to Carson City. We are going to be here for all of you at home, be a resource for all of you. Like I said earlier when we started the day, we are going to have our Progressive University where we deep dive into issues and really get to know the different issues that we care about. Those are going to start the first week of session. So the first Progressive University is going to be on February 7th in the evening. You'll get an email this week with all of the details, but we're definitely going to want you at those. That's our continuing education series, so we can get you the latest and greatest messaging, talking points on all of the issues we all care so much about. So thanks to our team. We are going to come up next with our next panel on Aviquame National Monument. You're not going to want to miss this. We are hopeful that President Biden will be designating this in the next month, so we're going to need your support, so stick around. Lots to come. All right, we have another amazing panel starting now. Get up, stretch your legs, but listen while you do it. We want to make sure we get to everything. Now, this next panel is something that we have been working on with this fabulous team of coalition partners for the past year. But that doesn't even compare to what folks like Alan and Kim and others have been doing for so long to get this area designated as a national monument. So I want to bring Will in. He is going to host our panel on a monumental movement and describe what we have been doing to get Aviquame National Monument designated as our next national monument here in Nevada. Will, take it away.
Thank you so much, Annette. Hi again, it's me, Will Craigman, Comms Director for Battleborn Progress. You've seen a lot of me this afternoon, but this is probably the panel I was looking forward to doing the most, because it's going to be discussing something that we've had the honor to be a part of for the better part of the past year and a half or so, and that is the campaign to designate a new national monument in the state of Nevada. Now, that means a lot of things. We're going to get into what exactly that means and why it's so important. But public lands is one of our top issues here at BBP and IPN. Of course, we're very involved in the effort to designate Gold Butte under the Obama administration as what was our previous national monument. And so Aviquame, which is in southern Nevada, we're going to talk through where that is and how you can get involved in that effort, is no less special, and in fact is extremely important for cultural, biological, and economic reasons. Now, I do have to start this panel with one caveat. One of the speakers who was originally scheduled to be here tonight unfortunately could not make it. That is Taylor Patterson, Executive Director of Native Voters Alliance Nevada, who you saw yesterday on one of our other panels. She is unfortunately extremely sick right now and doesn't have a voice. So in lieu of having her on, I didn't want to leave you all in a cold and dark Taylor Patterson-less world. And so we will be chat links to our Out in Front episode discussions where you can go back and see Taylor herself talking in her own words on the importance of Aviquame, especially to the indigenous communities here, located here in what we now call Nevada. And I also wanted to draw attention to various news clippings and op-eds and interviews that she's done as a part of the work to designate this monument, which we'll also be sharing in the chat. So you will still get your fill of Taylor Patterson. She's a friend of the show, as we call it. So you'll definitely get to see her back here very soon. I'm sure talking about it, when we cross our fingers, hopefully get a designation of this monument very soon. So with that all being said, I want to take us right into our panel. We have some fantastic folks lined up. We've got Alan O'Neills, the former superintendent of the Lake Mead National Recreation Area. We've got Kim Garrison Means, who is the owner of Mystery Ranch, just outside of Searchlight, Nevada. And then we also have Angeline Swalva, who is the fellow comms director with Nevada Conservation League. And so we're going to be talking tonight all about a monumental movement, the campaign to designate a Vicwame. So welcome, all three of you. I'm going to start with Alan. So Alan, I'm curious to know, and of course you have experience with this. You have taken the team, myself and Nat and the rest, out to the site. Tell us about why is a Vicwame so ecologically important, this area south of Las Vegas?
Well, from an ecological standpoint, this is, when we looked at what needed to be done in conservation in Nevada, one of the glaring omissions was that we didn't provide the needed protection for the eastern Mojave Desert in Nevada. So the idea of the whole monument boundary thing was, let's look at an ecological overlay and a cultural overlay. Cultural overlay obviously relates in importance of this to the 10 human-speaking tribes and the Southern Paiute tribes and the Hopi and such. But from an ecological standpoint, what we wanted to do is connect those protected areas on the California side, which several decades it took to work to get those protections. Mojave National Preserve, the Mojave Councilmember National Monument, the Mojave Trails National Monument, and the Dead Mountains Wilderness. They're all on the California side, but basically within the same ecosystem. We had not done the work on the Nevada side over the years, and so this effort was to look at what a boundary would look like that maximized the protection of species and things relating to the ecology. So, I think connecting those protected areas on the California side, in addition to the Boulder City Conservation Area, all the way over to Lake Mead National Recreation Area, really is connecting the East Mojave Desert to the Colorado Plateau through Lake Mead National Recreation Area, and that's critically important. So those boundaries include the elevation gradients, the migratory corridors, the little niches like the natural springs and such, so that we had a complete integrated system. There are many places on this landscape that had no protective prescriptions. Some others had a first layer of protection, but it wasn't adequate to provide the protection that a national monument would be. So from a species standpoint, of course, this is critical. Most of the monument is critical. Desert tortoise habitat, which is a threatened species, is actually the highest density of desert tortoise anywhere in the state and the largest extent of habitat. But, we talk a lot about the desert tortoise, but you have to also recognize on this monument landscape, there are actually 50 other special status species or sensitive species. In other words, these are species that the Bureau of Land Management, Fish and Wildlife Service has identified as being of concern to conservation because their numbers are on the decline. So having 50 sensitive species all within the same monument area is critically important, and that's why protecting these migratory corridors were so important. So, one of the things that people really like about the monument is the extent of the Joshua Tree Forest. This is the eastern terminus of the world's largest Joshua Tree Forest, and a very healthy Joshua Tree Forest, despite 24 years of drought. In fact, the tallest Joshua tree in the state of Nevada is within the monument area. And we think there's only two others that were taller where they were in the Mojave Preserve, and we think that they may have been taken out by the fire that happened several years ago. So this may be the tallest Joshua tree on the planet. Anyway, I think Joshua trees are very important species because of what it does in terms of providing cover for other species and such. And so, some of these other species would be like the desert bighorn sheep, the Gila monster, the collared lizard, the golden eagle, the peregrine falcon, species like that. So, this whole area has been identified by Audubon as an important birding area, which is an important designation by Audubon, which recognizes that this is one of the best birding areas anywhere in the state. And so having that designation, there's actually 18 species just of raptors here. We have one of the highest golden eagle populations in the state. And so we also have some unusual birds associated with the Sonoran Desert, which habitat part of it, which use part of this. Also, it's on the Pacific Flyway. So from a birding standpoint, very important resource. One of the things that people don't realize is our native grasses, which we're losing a lot of throughout the West. This happens to be an area that has 28 species, natural species of grasses, unlike almost any other place on the Mojave Desert. You just can't find these kind of grasslands normally on the Mojave Desert. After our recent monsoon rains in August, some of those grasses were almost waist high. So, having that kind of a grassland environment is very unusual and such. So that's a really important thing. And we have a lot of, incredible geology, very, very diverse geology. So having that variety, a lot of scenic canyons, a lot of little nooks and crannies and such. So, this is, from an ecological standpoint, very important. Equally important, of course, is the cultural overlay and the cultural features associated with the Vickrell May or Spirit Mountain. But this whole environment is one of the most important areas to our native tribes. In fact, it is probably the most important area. It's our place of creation, Spirit Mountain, and this landscape and such, and affiliation with Spirit Mountain and such is critically important too. It's their most holy place.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that hits on really a key part of this too, is that it is a sacred area for the different Huron-speaking tribes that trace their creation story to this land. And I encourage folks, again, if you want to get a deeper dive into just how important this land is to the indigenous communities, check out some of those links that we're dropping into the chat, where Taylor Patterson talks a great deal about those issues. And on the subject of the Joshua trees and all the species, I think, again, like mentioning when Alan, you took us out there, and the whole team out there, I think that might have been one of my favorite days at work ever, because it was so just beautiful to see the desert landscape, the mountains, the valleys, and Annette even got to see her very first bighorn sheep, her very first real bighorn sheep. She plays a sheep for Public Lands Day, but she's had never seen one in person. So we think it might have been a sign, possibly from the grandfather or the one who watches over that landscape. But I want to then talk to you about how, so what you just talked about is why this place is so ecologically important, and it enjoys currently this sort of patchwork of various types of federal protection for species or certain types of fauna and whatnot. So when I'm going to say when, because we anticipate President Biden very soon to sign a designation of this land as a national monument. He said he would just this past November at the Tribal Nations Summit. So when that happens, how does that designation go towards protecting all these natural resources that you listed?
Is that for me? Well,
yes.
Oh, well, we think this in terms of areas in the country needing protection. We think this is one of the highest priority areas for protection because a monument provides that connective tissue. That's what ties all this together. It ties decades, literally decades of work together. By one single action, we can do more for climate change than almost anything else that we can do in our state. And so, I think when you're looking at the President's America the Beautiful initiative, there couldn't be a better project nationally in my mind. To me, in terms of climate change, the monument may be the single most important thing we could do.
Absolutely. And we are looking forward again to that announcement very soon. I selfishly was like, hopefully not this weekend because we're working the summit, but hopefully very, very soon we will hear some good news. And so on that note, I'm actually going to bring in Angeline. Angeline, I'm curious about President Biden and his plans with this monument. Since the very start of his administration, I think it was one of the first things he rolled out actually was the America the Beautiful initiative to protect 30% of lands and waters by 2030. Of course, NCL has been at the forefront of being involved in getting proclamations from the county, from the legislature supporting this effort. So where does Bequame fit into this broader 30 by 30 plan, and why do you think the president, specifically in the interior, are eyeing this really for designation in that context?
Yeah, thank you, Will. And President Biden is one of the most promising presidents we've had on conservation and climate issues. So this is an exciting moment for us. And I appreciate Alan sharing the ecological and historical value of the Bequame monument and why the protection is necessary. I know if Taylor was on today, she'd make it a point to share a lot about its significance for cultural reasons. And also, protecting our public lands is an important part of this ambitious and necessary goal that our country has called 30 by 30. Essentially, it's an initiative to protect 30% of our lands and waters by the year 2030. Now, that goal was initially proposed by a group of scientists back in 2019 that argued that we need to conserve 30% of the lands of our Earth's surface by the year 2030 in order to address biodiversity, to address climate change, and also to protect lands as we know it and to be able to move forward in the environments as they are now. Now, 30 by 30 is a goal that was adopted by several countries now, and to something Will had just mentioned, it was one of the first acts that President Biden took was initiating or committing to a 30 by 30 goal, and then in 2021, President Biden laid out a vision of how exactly we're going to do that. Now, in this vision, he called the campaign the America the Beautiful initiative. It's essentially a 10-year locally led campaign to conserve and restore the lands and waters. And quotes from the report says it's the lands and waters upon which we all depend that binds us together as Americans. Now, declaring a Bequame a national monument is actually going to advance our nation towards reaching our 30 by 30 goal by conserving approximately 450,000 acres of landscape in southern Nevada from development. But 30 by 30 isn't just about President Biden providing federal protections to our public lands, but it's about doing so in a way that means we are also pursuing a collaborative and inclusive approach to conservation. It's about honoring tribal sovereignty and support for the priorities that tribal nations have. And we know that any effort that we have to accelerate the pace of conservation really needs to respect tribal sovereignty and help those communities fulfill their vision of stewardship of the natural, cultural, and historic resources that we have. So Vicwame encompasses hundreds of thousands of acres of rich history, natural resources that are considered most sacred to human-speaking tribes, as well as the Hopi and Chemehuevi Paiute. But protecting the promised Vicwame National Monument gives us a really special opportunity then to reshape our conservation agenda so it's more inclusive of Indigenous communities and voices who have been historically left out of these conversations. So, so we know that Vicwame is going to be important for proving to be a more our conservation efforts to be more inclusive. It's also important to helping reach our 30 by 30 goal. And also Biden in his plan says that 30 by 30 should be about supporting locally led and locally designed conservation efforts. So we're really proud that Vicwame has a lot of broad support from local communities. That's outside of over the 150,000 people who have signed our Vicwame petition already. It's also received a lot of support from local tribes, from conservation groups, from chambers of commerce, city council, town advisory boards, members of Congress, all of these individuals who understand the importance of protecting our public lands. So we know that Vicwame and other public lands in Nevada are going to be key in shaping our path as we work to reach our 30 by 30 goal nationally.
Yeah, and thank you for explaining that. I think it really helps put Nevada at the centerpiece of that, and really emphasizes that we have so much here that's worth protecting, and that we can really contribute to being part of meeting the nation's climate goals as a whole. And that's actually my next question for you, which is, does protecting a Vicwame, again, when this is designated, what is that going to do to not only transform, Nevada's climate goals, but also help meet the climate goals of the nation and, frankly, the world?
Great question, Will. And it's important to know that protecting our public lands are crucial to meeting our climate goals. So I briefly discussed our 30 by 30 goal. At its core, 30 by 30 works to address declining biodiversity and address climate change. And so protecting at least 30% of our world's terrestrial and aquatic habitats and 30% of our world's ocean habitats, we can reduce extinctions and safeguard our natural resources, which we rely on really for food, for jobs, and for recreation. And so with a growing number of plants and animals that are facing extinction, our natural places rapidly disappearing to development, and climate change is further imperiling our health and the health of oceans and lands. Scientists are really just urging that we need bold action to conserve more of our lands and waters. Now, Alan mentioned about the ecological importance of Vicwame being home to 28 unique species, including the Mojave desert tortoise, the bighorn sheep, Gila monsters, and other flora and fauna that make this land unique to our state. A Vicwame National Monument and other conserved spaces can really help to fight the climate crisis by protecting the area from any fossil fuel development in the future, which we know further fossil fuel development will continue to contribute to dangerous pollution and destroy the natural spaces forever. On public lands also, and this is where it gets a little sciencey, but public lands can sequester carbon and make ecosystems and communities more resilient to the impacts of climate change. So ecosystems like forests, grasslands, wetlands are natural and efficient carbon sinks, and they can capture and store carbon in roots, plants, and soils to help us reduce that in our air. And this is crucial, I want to mention, because Nevada really is not currently on track to meet our emission reductions goals. So conserving large spaces of our natural lands are really critical. So, conserving our public lands is just one way that we can address the climate crisis. And we know that establishing a Vicwame National Monument is going to play an important role in our climate fight.
It absolutely will, and I think we're all looking forward to the day that we can say that, we have a Vicwame National Monument to really put that into practice. And I think that that's going to kind of bring me down to my next speaker, which is Kim Garrison Means. Kim is the owner of Mystery Ranch out there by Searchlight. And Searchlight is one of the many different smaller Southern Nevada towns and communities that are adjacent to the proposed monument site. And so, Kim, my first question for you is, what does before even this land gets designated, this is the backyard for you and a lot of your neighbors, quite literally. So talk about what does it mean for small towns, for local communities, and the artists that make their way out to the Mystery Ranch, what does that land mean to them?
This place is so special to me and to the people who live in Searchlight and also the other villages that are within the Vicome landscape, such as Calmaveri, Palm Gardens, and the adjacent areas like Nelson and Nipton. Everyone who lives in this landscape lives here and appreciates it and uses the landscape outside of their community or their home. And people love to recreate on this landscape. Our residents like to get out in Jeeps and ATVs and explore. They like to walk around out here. We have visitors that come and camp. It's something that we take even when we're inside of our homes, because our houses are situated to see the sunsets on the mountains and to look outside and see Joshua trees and see those beautiful birds and those animals. I am lucky enough to have grown up outside of town in actually the Vicome National Monument landscape itself. And the town of Searchlight that we're referring to is, in fact, the whole township is surrounded by the monument. And I think that there aren't that many national monuments that are this big, that are engulfing entire communities within it. And so this was even more important than usual in the past, to bring the residents from the beginning in this process, but also this has been a really a keen, progressive process, I think across the board for everybody involved, in how much listening and how much availability that everyone has had for every community involved. So for our community, it was very important that our residents still felt confident that we are going to be able to use this landscape in the same ways that we are historically used to using it. So people like rock hounding groups. I mean, we are a town that was founded on mining, and so there's an identity for the history of our town, which is also embedded in the history of Vicome. There are historical sites from the mining and the ranching era, and while we don't have ranching anymore, being able to explore the landscape publicly is very important to people. And when industrial projects started to be proposed for this landscape about 15 years ago, we started to have large industrial projects proposed. That was when our community started to get involved in lands protections, and we soon found that that we didn't have a voice that was large enough on our own. And so getting involved in conservation groups and partnering with our neighbors, the Fort Mojave tribe, the Southern Paiute tribes, we had a larger voice together. So we're excited about this landscape being protected in the future, because this, for us as a community, the number one thing for us is that it remains historically the same for us. And that is so important to us, because we know it's a privilege to live out here in this incredibly beautiful Mojave Desert area. So yeah, that's what we're excited about with this process. And you also asked about the artists that visit the Mystery Ranch. And so just as a little background, we say that I'm the owner of the Mystery Ranch, and I do in fact own this property, but I don't think that this place is something that can really be owned. So our family and friends want to share this property for the benefit of the environment around it. So for the last 10 years or so, we have invited artists, scientists, ecologists, historians, anybody who wants to be inspired and discover and research this environment, specifically in the East Mojave, to come out here, and we'll give them a place to stay, and we'll help make connections with other and the town and the resources that they might need to produce this research. And so people, when they first come here, a lot of times people from outside of our region have mythologies that they arrive with about the desert. Like the desert is a wasteland, the desert doesn't have a lot in it, it's kind of barren. And then they're absolutely amazed when they get here and see how much diversity of plants and animals there are, how green it is, because we're at a high elevation, almost 4,000 feet, through a lot of the monument. And it has beautiful mountains that get more rainfall than other desert places. So it is verdant and vibrant and exciting for people, and a place where really you can have wide open spaces. And I think that's something that visitors really respond to. There aren't that many places where you can look and not see a town and not see industrialization, and you can see wide sweeps of valleys and mountains and be inspired by the vastness of our world and be in awe of nature. And this is truly one of those magnificent places. So it's very easy for artists and scientists to be inspired by this landscape. And we're very excited that we've been able to energize so much of the artists in our local community in Las Vegas and around the nation to help us tell the stories of Avicuame with the help of those scientists.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated really by that fusion between science and art, because you always think of those things as separate, but really in a lot of ways they're not. And what I would really stood out to me when we visited the Mystery Ranch was that fusion between the appreciation and the deep study and knowledge about the natural world, but then using that and reinterpreting it, and turning it into an art piece. And I think that's something that's really special. And I think that's something that was captured also, just to shout out the Spirit of the Land exhibit. Would you tell us a little bit about that briefly? And we can drop the link to that in the chat as well for people to check out.
Yeah, so for the last couple of years, we've been working with a number of professional artists from tribes from the Fort Mojave Indian tribe, from the Nuwu Southern Paiute tribe in Las Vegas, and many community members as well. And we put everybody together to tell stories creatively through this landscape in a number of exhibitions. Las Vegas, Laughlin, Searchlight, Southern California, online. We brought the stories from artists, poets, musicians, storytellers, dancers, all having their own interpretations of things like the symbiotic relationship of the plants and the animals, or the spiritual connection to Avicuame, or historical stories. And what we found as we presented this information to the public was that this is a very powerful way to get stories across, that when we talk about ecological situations, when we talk about the need for conservation, and we might mention things like climate change, it's really easy for us to tune out or shut down and say, I can't hear another scientific fact about why we're not doing enough right now. And so being able to share those in more creative ways and spaces was very energizing for new people who were being introduced to this idea. And also for our communities, a way for Searchlight and our local rural places to communicate about what we love. We did a community postcard art exhibition that anyone could submit to, and we had over 200 submissions. So neighbors could see what their neighbors and friends and family thought of the space that we all live in, and there was space to write about it, and we could see our opinions in each other's words of what we appreciate. Another thing that was very successful was that we kept everything in the positive, and so much work to create community change has to be told in the negative. We're often fighting against something and bringing attention to something that's wrong. And this National Monument campaign has been wonderful because it's in the positive. And along the way, because we've spent so much time planning with the community, we also saw that people in the community have a lot of fears. So, so we can address those fears about the future, or fears about changing a land designation, or whatever they are. And we can tell stories about that, but in a positive way. We're all getting to know one another down here, and getting to know our tribal neighbors has been really important to people in Searchlight. And so as our communities also get more closely knit, because we all want to be stewards of this place, using methods like storytelling, like art workshops, like exhibitions that share everyone's point of view, have been really effective and brought us a lot of joy within our communities.
Thank you for that, Kim. And we've posted the links down in the chat. Remember, if you've got questions for our panel, we're going to get to those in just a second. But I'm now going to go we're going to start back again, because I want to ask, we talked about the ecological importance. We've touched on, of course, the cultural importance to tribes who trace this land to their creation story. We've talked about how this fits in with the local communities that live there, and artists and scientists who treasure this land. And we've talked about how this all fits into the current administration's climate goals, and really dealing with the climate crisis that faces us today. But as something that I want to talk about, I want to hold a step back and look at the coalition that's really been built around protecting a people. And I think this is something that, when I sort of grappled with the fact that this would be our last real panel of the summit, which is that today, in this day and age, a lot of the things that we've discussed these past 2 days of the summit deal with some very heavy issues. And also even this morning, at the shooting, tragically, that claimed 10 lives in Monterey Park, we talked about earlier this morning, and the continuous dealing with violence, extremism, hatred, bigotry, things that we talked to. But something I wanted to really highlight is just the efforts of the coalition and the coalition building and the movement around designating this sacred place, and just the diversity and the thought given to it. So I'm going to ask each of you to weigh in on this. And the question is, how does the Honor of Equal May Coalition, and really the tribes who've been organizing for this even prior to that, how does this coalition really serve as a model for future, not even just future monument designations or future land protections, but really what does it say about communities coming together and working together towards a common interest that is about protecting and preserving something that we all treasure and see value in for various reasons? And so, Alan, I want to start with you. on talking about what does the coalition building effort really say about this campaign and where we're headed and what we can learn from it on all sorts of other issues.
That's a really good question, and I have some pretty strong feelings here. I've been involved professionally in public land management issues for 56 years now, in a lot of different capacities. Been involved in a lot of national initiatives, things like the Wild Scenic River System, a lot of national park designations, a lot of monument designations. Been fortunate to be part of those processes, and I can say without any doubt that this was the most effective process that I've ever been engaged in. It just started with a few of us, but how that coalition came together and how we reached out to the community. This is truly a community-driven, citizen-driven process. It's not a government-driven process at all. Government really had no role in most of this. This was what we did as a community, what we thought was right as a community, and I think that speaks to the success. I mean, Kim is modest, but I mean, she probably knocked on every door in Searchlight, because Searchlight people typically in rural communities in Nevada are they're skeptical of government. Is it some kind of a power grab? Is it some, what's going on here? And unless you communicate, those rumors build upon themselves till you get the division that you can't cross over. And so the best way to do that is one-on-one. Talk to your neighbors. Here's what we're thinking about. What's your concern here? I mean, you concerned about you won't be able to take these backcountry roads, or are you concerned about industrialization of this? You're concerned about losing your dark night sky with an industrial development. So, my lesson here is that you go to all of these folks who you might normally not communicate. The Chamber of Commerce hasn't always been supportive of conservation efforts, but the Boulder City Chamber, the Laughlin Chamber, engaging them and seeing that there could be some benefit to the people that they do business with, or part of their thing and such. So, involving all those people, the OHV community is often not supportive of conservation efforts because they think, well, once it's designated, their access to these routes are running closed. And we wanted to make sure that that wasn't the case. We feel like that recreational resource is important, and a way to access a lot of this monumental areas is through the backcountry road. There's like 500 miles of backcountry road within a monument, and that's the way that people enjoy it. So talking through those issues, the fact that we got resolution from Clark County, the commission, the Henderson Council, the Boulder City Council, the town advisory board. I don't know how many support letters we have, but I've never seen so many. We've got groups who I should know, having been involved in this business so long, that are part of our coalition that I never heard of. Great Old Broads for Wilderness. It's like, oh my goodness, where did these people come from? But I mean, when you have an open process and you invite people into that tent to hear what they have to say, engage them. So the important part we're going to have moving forward is that we need to keep this citizen community engagement. We need to have a way to continue for people to be involved. Government's going to go slow in these kinds of things. So we need to provide that momentum. Now we got this momentum build up. How are we going to take this momentum and move forward? We don't want this to go away once the president designates this, and all of a sudden we're looking around, well, where's the coalition members? It's important that we carry through in stewarding this landscape the way that we think it needs to properly steward.
We're having some technical issues, so I'm going to pause for just a second. Okay, I think we are good. Thank you for that, Alan. That was terrific. I wanted to then ask Angeline, same question. And again, we are coming up on the end here, but just what is this coalition building process spell, and how does it serve as a good example going forward?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Will. And I really like Alan's sentiment about having so many benefits of protecting our public lands, that we really do reach so many different parts of our community that may not, groups that may not have been part of our environmental conversation in the past. So this is a really exciting time for us. I'll say that having a diverse coalition of supporters is critical, because it reminds us all that all communities deserve access to our public lands, and that road to access for these communities might look different amongst each other. We know that Black, Brown, Indigenous, and low-income communities are often not part of the conservation agenda, and often get left out of where those spaces are, and are not able to access them. And I'll reference something I said earlier about 30 by 30, but in President Biden's plan, America the Beautiful, when he describes 30 by 30, he wants to make sure that the places that we protect, and this initiative is focused on the lands and the waters that bind us together as Americans. And so there's a story that our public lands continue to tell long after that we're all gone. Not only is this going to be about a restoration of our natural resources, but it's also going to be about it's going to tell a story about the restoration of relationships that took place during that time. And it's exciting that in this moment that Oakland can represent that.
Thank you. And then Kim, give us your perspective on this as well.
This has been a healing process for our community, a healing between our community and the tribal communities, of which, our community being a mining town, it appeared on the landscape that was originally the environment of these tribes. And so our communities speaking to each other has been really powerful. Yes, like Angeline said, a lot of groups don't traditionally get spoken to, and Searchlight has felt disenfranchised from the government in the past and not represented, and frankly kind of fought against by outside forces. And so one of the big lessons was about listening, deep listening to neighbors, getting to the bottom, listening to people's trauma stories through this, of all kinds, whoever was at the table, and knocking on every door, as Alan said, myself or some neighbors and friends. And early on, when we were knocking on doors, one of the things that was said to us was, if there's a flag in the yard or something where you think that person might not be on board with conservation, like, you can skip that house. And we said, no, this is our community. This is a small rural community. We knock on every single neighbor's door, and we sent notices to every post office box about every public event. So not leaving people behind was a lesson here that I hope other programs take going forward in campaigns. And then the power of individuals in this. I am not a conservationist. I'm not a trained person. I'm an artist that has a resource that I'm able to share. And because of our neighbors really getting involved, our town, our neighborhood was able to express our desire to add 70,000 more acres to the monument. That was important. And so, just a few people in the community who are not politically savvy, but just come up and help and show up and be present and listen, can have a strong impact on how these initiatives are shaped and where they go.
Thank you so much, Kim. I really quick want to ask a couple questions from the chat. This first one's for Alan. Alan, can you talk briefly about the importance of protecting petroglyphs, not hieroglyphs, petroglyphs, at Ubiquame in Southern Nevada?
Well, petroglyphs, obviously we have a lot of important sites out there, and they need stewardship. They need stewards to keep an eye on them. The government doesn't have the staff to do that. We need to do that through partnerships and other ways. And in this particular, the sites are really important, but there's a lot broader message here in terms of the spiritual message of the tribes and why this landscape is so critical to them and their life, life stories and such. So, I think we have an opportunity here to provide a level of education and interpretation that I think would be unique. And so having the tribes help us understand their story and such are critically important.
Thank you for that. And then my next question is I'm going to throw this one to Angeline, which is building on the momentum of Ubiquame's pending designation. What lands are we looking to protect next?
That's a great question. I think there's a lot of opportunity that comes next for lands protection. I think some that even go beyond our state borders. I think something that we are focused on, in addition to public lands, is also protecting our wildlife. And we're going to look at looking into the next legislative session. We're going to be talking about wildlife crossings, making sure that our wildlife can cross safely to continue their natural migratory patterns. So, when we do talk about conserving our public lands, we also want to make sure infrastructure exists so that those public lands can continue to support our wildlife. So that's something that we're looking at next.
Thank you so much. Angeline, Kim, Alan, thank you all so much. We're going to drop two last few links in the chat. Number one is to honorubiquame.org. You can find the petition there to sign to add your name to the list of supporters for Ubiquame. I think we're at over, like 150,000, something like that. And so you can be one of those folks. You can also find more information about the monument and its various sites. The second link is a link to a YouTube video, which is a beautiful collage with a song that is performed by Kim here on our panel. That honors the land and really gives you a moving insight and visual journey through Ubiquame. So I want you all to check those out. Again, check out the links we dropped earlier from Taylor Patterson, who again, sadly couldn't join us tonight. And that's all we've got. Again, thank you all so much. And Annette, back to you.
Thank you, Will. And for those of you at home, if you signed up early enough, you should have gotten this fabulous Protective Ubiquame sticker in your little survival kits that we sent you for the summit. So you got a little bit of swag so you can help us protect Ubiquame as well. And again, go to the honorubiquame.org website and sign our petition. The link is in the chat. So please go there right now on this tiny little break between our keynote and this panel and sign that petition while you wait, because we need every voice to be heard so we can get this over the finish line with President Biden. Thank you, everyone. We'll be back with you in 2 seconds for our amazing keynote speaker, Councilmember Rebecca Kaplan. You are not going to want to miss this. I cannot wait to talk to her. See you soon. Welcome back, everyone, to the Progressive Summit. Again, thank you for being here. This is one of our final keynotes, and we are so excited to have this next guest. This is Councilmember Rebecca Kaplan from Oakland City Council. Councilmember Kaplan was one of the youngest LGBTQ+ people ever elected to the Oakland City Council has led on so many different progressive issues and is going to talk to us about their leadership on the City Council and all of the good work that's happening in Oakland. So, Councilmember, thank you for being here. Please take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Good afternoon. It is such a pleasure to be with you, and I'm so honored to be joining the stage together with such an amazing array of illustrious leaders. And thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Rebecca Kaplan, and as you've heard, I'm the council member at large for the city of Oakland. That means I'm elected citywide and represent the entire community. Prior to being elected to the Oakland City Council, I was the elected director at large on the AC Transit Board, which is our local public transit agency, which is an elected position where I'm located. And I've also worked as a state legislative aide and a housing rights attorney, among other things, and have been a longtime activist prior to running for elective office myself. The first political campaign I was significantly involved in was while I was an undergraduate living in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I volunteered on the campaign of Senator Kennedy. Helped Senator Kennedy win re-election the year that his opponent was someone you may have heard of by the name of Mitt Romney, who had arrived in Massachusetts that day to file to run against Senator Kennedy, and ran a very, very expensive campaign that was defeated by a powerful grassroots community coalition. And so that was, when I was a teenager, and it informed my view of what is possible to achieve through political action and through coalition building and advocacy. And so I've been living now for many, many years in Oakland, California, where I've been both working and living and serving in a variety of public roles, and now on the Oakland City Council. And so in terms of how we put our progressive values into action, there have been a few instances where we have helped lead items that were initially seen as too radical and that people in fact made fun of, and which have then become normalized and accepted. As you mentioned, I was the first openly LGBT person to be elected to office in Oakland, and this was not in the 1950s, nor was it even in the 1970s, which is when the city across the bay, San Francisco, elected the first openly gay supervisor, Harvey Milk. But in the East Bay, it was decades later. And though I was running for office as a housing activist and a workers' rights activist, the first newspaper headlines, when I declared was, lesbian runs for office, which is, fine and true and good also, but also I think shows how far that struggle was from being recognized in terms of people not seeing LGBT people in positions of leadership and seeing that as so unusual. And even as I have been in office, we've continued to deal with overt homophobia even these many years later. And you may have heard throughout the country these instances of the Proud Boys attacking LGBT events, attacking Drag Queen Story Hour at our libraries. That happened in my county also, right here in Alameda County, which is the county where I live and work, not only in places that are reputed to be homophobic, but right here in our community in the East Bay, we had a violent attack on Drag Queen Story Hour at our local library. And I worked together with other community leaders to organize a speak out and community healing and community outreach in response to that, but still have for many years been, for many people, the first or only LGBT person that they've seen in a position of leadership, or even been told that I was the first out person they ever met. And so I think even as we continue the struggle on many vital issues facing our community, it is important that we don't pretend that things are over, because there can be an inclination to think that these things are resolved. So for example, there is still to this day significant disproportionate homelessness among LGBT people, and I, being often the only out person in a room, have had to explain to people, even people for whom they don't have any hatred, they don't have any overt bigotry, but the way that the homeless shelters were set up historically, with men's dorms and women's dorms, leaving many gender nonconforming and LGBT people to feel unwelcomed in any of the homeless shelters. And when I would bring that up with people who cared about homelessness, they might have been the first time anyone explained that to them, that many people who don't fit in the traditional gender categories then felt unwelcomed in any of the homeless services. And we've been working to remedy that as well. And of course, many other topics we've worked on as well, including an innovative civilian crisis responder program called Macro in Oakland, where when we get 911 calls about things like mental health issues and other matters that don't need an armed police response, that we now have trained civilian crisis responders to be dispatched. That, much like fighting for gay rights in my initial years, when we initially proposed the Civilian Crisis Responders Program, it was denounced, it was attacked. Other politicians said it was too radical. You know, how can you send anyone but police on any of these calls? And now this program has been widely recognized, widely replicated, has received millions of dollars of state funding to support it. And this approach that you don't need to send armed police to a whole range of calls, including calls related to mental health, has received more recognition, and I think gives us really the opportunity to build a healthier, more effective, and by the way, more cost-effective also response for our communities. So thank you for having me here, and it's a pleasure to share time with all of you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for those opening remarks and sharing your experiences with our folks today. I want to ask you a couple questions specifically around homelessness, the homelessness issue, the houselessness issue. We are in a crisis here in Nevada as well. We see the cities and the counties in the state often not funding mental health services properly, not responding to the mental health crisis that you were talking about properly. We see cities that have now, like Las Vegas, that have criminalized homelessness and are literally, if somebody is perceived to be homeless, they will pick them up and take them to the jail. How does a city do better on this issue? And what are the steps that the city, the counties, the state needs to take? And what lessons can we learn here in Nevada from the work that you're doing in Oakland?
Well, thank you so much for that. It's incredibly important that we respond more effectively around homelessness and recognize, first and foremost, there is a significant affordable housing shortage. And so there's often an attempt to portray the homeless people as being individual questions of, you know, each person individually just should work harder, without recognizing that many who are homeless already are working and have jobs. But in fact, that we have so underbuilt affordable housing that no matter how hard each individual tries, there simply is not a sufficient affordable housing supply. So one piece of the puzzle needs to be significantly expanding affordable housing. And one of the things we've done in Oakland is adopt a policy to prioritize the use of public land for affordable housing development. Affordable housing developers, typically nonprofits, often struggle to acquire land, especially if they have to compete with the for-profit developers to buy land. And land can be very expensive. And so for a city like Oakland, places like in the Bay Area, where land is so expensive, we have many government agencies, including the City of Oakland and Alameda County and the school district, who own significant parcels of public land. And so we adopted a policy to prioritize these publicly owned parcels for affordable housing. At the council meeting just yesterday, we approved yet another affordable housing project on a public parcel known as the East 12th parcel that will build a significant affordable housing development. But we've also put out multiple additional parcels, one that used to be a parking garage, one that used to be completely empty. We've also done some amazing successful interventions with buying dorms and hotels. And so I would really recommend that to people in other cities as well. We had a college that moved out of Oakland. We bought their dorm in Rockridge and converted that to housing. We have another one called the Lake Merritt Lodge that we are renting and in the process of seeking to buy that we've used to house the homeless. And so even as we're pushing to build more housing, which of course is a multi-year process when you're talking new construction, we've also pushed successfully to buy some existing buildings like dorms and hotels that can be used to get people off the streets right away. And one other thing I would share that I think is really important that the dorms and hotels really allow us to meet. Sometimes there's a debate between, do unhoused people need services or do they need housing? And in many, many cases, they need both. And what acquiring the dorms and hotels has allowed us to do is set up navigation centers where we can have on-site staff with on-site services and have rooms so people can get off the streets. Because if somebody is sleeping on the street and you say, okay, we're going to bring you a counselor to talk to you, but then still leave you on the street, then that counseling service doesn't achieve what's really needed. And so we need, even as we provide those support services, to have rooms so people can get off the streets right away. And so acquiring buildings that are like dorms and hotels has allowed us to have that combination of rooms and services that has been very effective.
So my next question, on this topic and other progressive issues is you remarked that you were laughed at when you brought these different ideas of dealing with this issue or other issues differently and trying something new, not criminalizing people simply for being homeless. How do you shift that mindset that exists at maybe a public official level? And how can our activists learn from your experience to shift that mindset? Because I think that's our biggest problem is there is a mindset in Nevada where, well, if we just put them in jail, then, whatever, they'll figure it out. And that's clearly not how this works.
No, I think that is so important. There is such pressure to ignore people's fundamental human needs and act as if we don't need government. And this has been something that has been pushed by a organized, well-funded right-wing effort. Ronald Reagan was one of the linchpins of this effort and decimated a whole array of public services, including decimating public health and mental health services in California, and then bringing that approach to the whole country. And people who would talk about, I want to shrink government to drown it in the bathtub, and then people are drowning in floods and other acts of devastation. And when you devastate government services, it means they aren't there to provide those vital needs. And one of the things that I think we as progressives need to speak up about with more pride is that government services are we, the people, collectively taking action. If each of us, whenever there would be a fire, would have to go out and privately hire someone to come put out a fire, that would cost millions more dollars, and it wouldn't work. You wouldn't be able to get a response in time to put out a fire if your house caught fire or something in your neighborhood. The reason people collectively organize fire departments is both because it's better and more effective at putting out fires, and it actually saves money compared to having each person pursue those services privately. And so when we talk about why it's important to collectively act through what we call government, which is simply the people acting together, it saves money and it saves lives. And so when you see the specific example of, oh, we don't need to build homeless shelters, we'll just put the homeless in jail, it's actually more expensive to house the homeless in jail. Jails are incredibly expensive to build, to operate, to staff, and to run. And so that is another place where we can push back against the right-wing narrative that so often tries to say that social services are wasteful, right? And they say that they're being fiscally responsible and that they're trying to save money. And that has been used as an argument against public services, when in fact what they are advocating for is more expensive. It costs more to put people in jail than to prevent those problems. It costs more to put out fires individually than through a collective fire department. And so doing things in a more thoughtful way, in a way that we might call progressive, is actually common sense and saves dollars. And so I think people don't recognize how expensive incarceration is. They don't necessarily recognize how expensive planetary destruction is, right? People said, oh, we don't want to spend money on sustainable energy projects, but now they'll spend the money having to fix the floods and the fires and the storms and the devastation and the disease that are caused by the climate impacts of failing to make those investments. And so maybe we need to take back responsibility from being a word that is used by conservatives to describe what they are pushing for, which is in fact causing more suffering, more expense, and more harm to people and more cost.
So this is a summit about teaching all of our folks across Nevada how to be better leaders, how to speak up for what's right, how to lobby during the legislative session. And we've spent yesterday and today really teaching and learning about what's coming in the future for us. What are some of your proudest achievements as a council member that you think people should work to emulate in a state like Nevada?
Well, one of the things that is really important is to work together between those who are in elective office and those who are not, those who are activists and advocating. And I was an activist for many years before I became elected myself. And too often those connections are not maintained, and there can be a feeling of separation between those who are elected officials and those who are community activists. And so one of the things that I'm most proud of is how we have worked together and maintained and built and strengthened relationships between community activists and elected officials. And in fact, that was absolutely essential to how we were able to pass the Community Civilian Crisis Responder Program. That not only was I pushing for that as someone who was in elective office at the time, but there was a very strong, extensive grassroots community push. And when the council meetings would come up where we were debating this, tons of people would come and sign up to speak, and people would organize ahead of time and organize community meetings about it, and organize for people to call and write to the other elected officials to bring pressure, so that it wasn't me by myself advocating for the city of Oakland to fund the civilian crisis responder effort in our budget. It was with a whole coalition of community efforts, and with the community coalition working together with key allies in elective office. And I think that that is really, really important, both so that those who are elected, who do step up and take more progressive positions, are not left to be left hanging by yourself to face all the attacks, but also many elected officials are on the fence about these type of issues or don't really have strong opinions about them, whether it comes to things like, oh, we should buy hotels to house the homeless, or we should hire civilian crisis responders. It's not necessarily that everyone's against them. A lot of people just haven't really thought about them, aren't putting a lot of time on those issues. And so a strong grassroots push can help move something from being something where you have one or two votes to where you have a majority vote and you can pass it by the other elected officials who didn't support it from the start, but they weren't necessarily against it from the start, right? It just wasn't where they were focused. And so activist pressure can really help build the votes to be able to pass these types of efforts.
I want to talk a little bit about your environmental work, because I know that is something that you've done a lot of work on. So talk to us a little bit about some of those initiatives as well, and some of the good work you're doing around the environment, because that's a big part of what Battleborn Progress also works on.
Well, thank you so much. We are facing record-breaking droughts and floods throughout the world, and not just the nation. And the impacts of climate change are devastating and are now, I think, more people are recognizing them, though that doesn't mean they're taking action about them. But we also have a real problem of environmental racism and the disproportionate concentration of toxins on some of our hardest hit communities, and particularly on communities of color. And I'd like to just share for a moment on the screen, if I may, a map showing some of this problem in the Bay Area, which is where I work. So here you can see this map of the Bay Area in 2005 and 2015 showing the concentration of cancer risk from air pollution. And the bright purple is the area of the greatest danger where the most people are being subjected and harmed. And that bright purple area, which you can see is both in 2005 and perpetuates in 2015, that goes through the Highway 880 through Oakland up to the Port of Oakland and then curves up through Richmond. And so this is a predominantly African American community, largely a low-income community, also goes through the Latino community of Fruitvale, and over decades has continued to be where the worst of the air pollution, and not just the air pollution, but the worst of the health impacts from the air pollution are concentrated. And we have had devastating impacts to communities, including asthma, cancer, lower life expectancy in these areas. And so I have been pushing very hard to specifically address not only the air pollution region-wide, which as you can see from the two maps, in many of the areas the air pollution went down over that decade, but specifically the over-concentration on some of our hardest hit communities, which are being subjected to really devastating impacts. So we can take that map down, thank you so much. And so what does that mean? These areas are where we see the heavy concentration of diesel trucks as well as the ships at the port. And the diesel particulate emissions are one of the worst in terms of the impacts on the communities, causing people to have trouble breathing, causing cancer and other diseases. And so we have been leading the effort to switch away from diesel for trucks, for trains, for buses, for ships, and to move toward clean energy. That has included hybrid and electric vehicles, that has included biodiesel, and that has also included the nation's leading zero-emission hydrogen truck project in partnership with the Port of Oakland, which we launched last year, and which is providing zero-emission trucks in our community. And we are now fighting for a hydrogen production facility, which would be powered entirely by green energy, so that we can make this entire program green from end to end, both in terms of the emissions from the trucks and in terms of the production. And I think it's really important when we talk about environmental protection that we don't skip over the issue of environmental racism, both because of the incredibly harmful impacts that it causes on our hardest hit communities, but also because environmental racism is largely why environmental destruction has been gotten away with for so long. If we look at another example that got some national attention when there were protests, the Dakota pipeline, and the big fight to protect the indigenous communities and the water protectors of the local Native American community fighting against the Dakota pipeline. What many people may not have known is that there was originally a different route proposed for that pipeline. It went through a primarily white community, and the members of the primarily white community said, we don't want it here, so they rerouted it through a Native American community. And then when the Native American community said we don't want it here, they sent out heavily armed police to fire projectiles and water cannons at the demonstrators and at the water protectors. And so, and of course there was a huge solidarity camp that sprung up to help support the water protectors. And I had the honor to be able to be there for a time. But that example also shows that if it weren't for the racism involved, they would never have built the pipeline in the first place. And similarly, what we see where I lived in Oakland and in surrounding communities like Richmond, the concentration of pollution disproportionately on African American neighborhoods and also to some extent on Latino neighborhoods has been part of why it has been allowed to persist. And so making sure that we are speaking up for the needs of the hardest hit communities is how we make change in terms of environmental protection overall. And so now this push for the clean trucks is now getting more attention, and I have been successfully able to win millions of dollars of grants to help expand this effort. And so we will be able to switch out more and more of these diesel trucks, as well as working now on the ships as well, to have zero emission opportunities. But the fact that it is our lowest income communities and our communities of color where those pollutants have been concentrated is part of why there hasn't historically been enough of the effort to remedy it, and is part of why I have been fighting so hard for this, including for our hard-hit communities to have a voice in the region-wide and statewide decision-making that goes on in terms of air pollution and where toxins are cited, and where they are remedied and where they are not remedied.
So I really want to talk about this piece of it because Las Vegas and Reno have the exact same problem. The pollution disproportionately hits communities of color, specifically the Black and Latino community, and also our APIA community. One of the things that we know in Las Vegas and Reno is a lot of those communities are not the ones producing these toxins, but they're the ones hardest hit and impacted. Yet a lot of times these folks also cannot afford to have hybrid vehicles, electric vehicles, because they're simply out of the price range, even the ones that are used cars. One of the issues that we have in Nevada is we don't have public transportation, and the public transportation we do have is sad. And so how important is it to have public transportation as a part of this equation to solving the climate crisis, not just electrifying vehicles and things like this?
Absolutely. In order for us to solve the climate crisis, it is not enough for us to have cars that are powered by alternative means. We need to build a world with transit-oriented development, bicycle and pedestrian safety and access, and quality public transit with sufficient frequency and access for the community. We locally have fought for things like free bus passes for our school students, to expand public transit, including public transit hours, because where I live there is some public transit, but often it wasn't running at night, and so you'd have night shift workers not able to use it, even though those may be some of the folks who needed it the most. So we fought for expanding both the hours and the frequency of public transit. And, you know, car congestion create problems regardless of the fuel. And so while we need to have vehicles that are not powered by fossil fuel, we also need to build more housing that is readily accessible to where the jobs are, and we need to build more public transit. So that is part of why, for example, in Oakland, we're pushing for more transit-oriented development to build housing near the BART stations, near job centers. And that is often part of the problem in a variety of places, including in Nevada, where the affordable housing is further and further and further from where the jobs are. So part of the push needs to be not only access to newer cars, but to building the affordable housing near those job centers, so that people don't have to drive everywhere. In addition, I think it's fair to note that the majority of the pollution that is harming the health is actually also from the trucks and the heavy industry. And so it isn't just about an individual with their own car, but it is also with larger systemic decisions going on as well. And then finally, in terms of electric cars, for many tenants, they may not have an option to have electric cars because many tenants don't have access to electric car charging where they live. So we have been working to put on large-scale public electric car charging stations. We've got one, for example, being installed right now in a parking garage that the city of Oakland owns that will be readily available for folks 24 hours a day. So people who live in places that don't have charging can charge their cars there. We've also passed laws to add electric car charging in construction so that, you know, tenants in buildings in the future would be able to have electric cars. But we've also really pushed very hard for bicycle safety and bike lanes, for pedestrian safety and better crosswalks. One of the issues in terms of disproportionate impact both on the African American community, the Latino community, and also the AAPI community, has been traffic safety, where we've seen a disproportionate concentration of pedestrians being hit by cars and hit by trucks in the AAPI community, and the way that freeways have been built by destroying long-standing existing communities. For example, when the freeways were built through Oakland, they cut up what was historically Chinatown, was cut by freeways, as well as West Oakland, where there was a very robust African American retail and restaurants and clubs were bulldozed for freeways, and then that speeding car traffic being directed through the hardest hit communities, and then seeing disproportionate levels of people being injured and of it making it unsafe to walk or to bicycle because of the way the car traffic is directed, and that too has been done in a racially inequitable manner that hurts certain communities more than others. And so making sure that we're putting in safe crosswalks and lighting and bike lanes that are safe so that people can walk and bike, and so that we also build more housing in the areas where the jobs and the transit are, so that people don't have to drive for all their trips.
Well, thank you for all of that. Here's my last question for you today. And I think it's so amazing, all of the work that you're doing, and frankly, the similarities between Reno and Las Vegas and Oakland, especially with so many Californians who come here and live here now as well. My question for you is especially for like the young folks watching, you are an inspiration. You're a progressive. You're openly part of the LGBTQ plus community. You have fought for a lot of the issues we work on every single day. What has inspired you to do this work, and what keeps you fighting, and what lessons have you learned from the work that you've done so far? And what would you tell especially our younger audience watching at home, but all of our activists watching?
Well, absolutely. And, one of the reasons I'm compelled to do this work is because otherwise I'd be sitting at home screaming at the television and feeling upset about these things anyway. And so while it can be sometimes frustrating to engage in efforts around political change because, they don't always succeed, in my experience, it's more frustrating not to, because then we're just dealing with the injustice without that sense of being able to impact it. And so I do find it inspiring and helpful also to work in coalition with others. And that's part of why I think it is so important both to maintain and to continue to build relationships between progressive elected officials and grassroots community activism, so that we don't feel like we're alone, and so that we can put that energy into making positive change and into making things like community crisis responders, like zero emission trucks, like pedestrian safety in our community, so that people actually can walk around, and so that we start remedying the history of injustice. It also means being willing to talk about racism and call it out where we see it. It means being willing to talk about homophobia and face the comments and the nasty jokes and things that happen when you are out publicly. And doing that in a way that is in coalition also helps that not feel like we are alone. And, I feel like I also want to make sure to mention that COVID is not over. I want to thank you all for this COVID-safe method of interacting, and that when we talk about injustices that we need to continue to remedy, access to healthcare, access to sick leave, safe ventilation, masking and filtration, and other ways to protect our community from communicable diseases, which includes COVID and the flu and RSV and others that are circulating, as well as making sure to avoid the denial, whether it's denial about climate change or denial about disease, that often that denial is what causes people to not take action. And so that is also part of why the solidarity is so important, so that we can support ourselves and each other in being willing to face the inconvenient truths of the issues we face, so that we can work together to solve them.
So if folks are inspired by this, like I am today, how do they get in touch with you, and how do they follow along with the journey that you're on to make Oakland a better place while we're making Nevada a better place?
Well, thank you so much. Yes, my website is kaplanforoakland.org. That's KAPLANFOR, Oakland, OAKLAND.org. And you can join us there and sign up for our email list and also our social media to follow us with updates of the different things we're working on, and how to get involved and to get copies of laws that we've passed, whether it's the vacant property tax to help remedy homelessness. We wrote a vacant property tax, put it on the ballot, passed it in Oakland. We passed the first cannabis tax in America. We wrote and passed in Oakland. So definitely get in touch with us through our website, our social media, and you're welcome to join our email list as well. So we send out regular updates of the things we're working on. And I'm so honored to get to talk with you. It is such a pleasure to be with you all.
Well, I am absolutely honored to finally get to meet you. Just a quick share that one of our dear friends, Julie, who worked in Nevada for a long time, is actually who connected us and has worked for the council member as well, and brags about your work all the time. I was actually just texting with Julie to tell her how awesome you are. So it's an absolute honor to finally get to meet you. I've heard so many amazing things about you. And I want to thank you on behalf of our organization and all of the activists joining us and all the organizations and sponsors who have helped put this summit on, because you're absolutely incredible. And we hope to emulate a lot of the work that you've been doing. So thank you for joining us and sharing your time today.
Thank you so much.
All right, everyone. We'll be right back. Thank you all for joining us for this keynote. We'll be back in just a few seconds with more. All right, well, that's a wrap, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking with us for 2 days of learning and fun and camaraderie. I am so happy that this summit was a huge success. Big shout out to all of my team, especially Maria Teresa, who ran the back end this year, and it was absolutely flawless. Couldn't be more proud of her. And couldn't be more proud of our entire team. They worked so hard to put this together for you. And I really want to say thank you to them for, working past 9 to 5 and getting this done in a manner where you can learn and take skills with you into legislative session. So I want to remind you of a couple of things. There will be an evaluation coming your way this week to evaluate these 2 days of summit fun. So look for the evaluation. We want to have your feedback. Make sure you fill that out. It'll come to you in email and text message. So look for that. In addition to that, we will have our Progressive University coming up. Like I said, that will be the first session will be February 7th. So that'll be the day after legislative session starts. Legislative session starts on February 6th. I will be moving up to Carson City on February 4th. So look for more information from us to come. Now, tomorrow night is the State of the State. We will be covering that live on all of our social media, so follow us along with us on there. Many of our partner groups, including Plan and For Our Future, are having watch parties, so join them for their watch parties. You can find all of that information on their social media. But like I said, we'll be following along on social media as well and tweeting all of our hot takes for you. Until next year at the 10th Annual Progressive Summit, thank you for celebrating the 9th with us. And we look forward to celebrating all of our wins this legislative session with all of you over the next couple of months. Now, sign up to be a storyteller. Erin will put their information in the chat. Sign up to volunteer with all of these amazing organizations, including ours here at Battleborn Progress. And we will see you soon. Stay safe and healthy, everyone. And we'll see you out in front next Thursday, not this coming week, but next Thursday, talking all about the climate crisis. See you soon, everyone. And thank you for joining the Progressive Summit.